Hello. Yeah, midterm is from 23rd March, right? Okay, so fine. So I haven't looked into what portion we will be taking up as a midsem part. I will let you know. Right now, I think today is 3rd March only, so 20 days we have. I will let you know that what will be the syllabus for your midsems. So you can basically majorly divide your complete syllabus into half, and then half will be in midsems and half will be in endsems. So it will be like half portion, like you can say that if there are around 34 classes are there in total, so 17 classes for midsem, then 17 for endsem. Like this you can do. So up till the 17 classes, whatever we have done, that might be there in the midsem syllabus. But still, I will let you know about this thing. Okay, I'll confirm the syllabus. I'll put it on Google Classroom also. Yeah. Okay. So let us start, students. Students will join as and when they come, they can join. So we can start here. Uh, so good evening, all of you. We'll start with what where we left off yesterday. So Minimax search I was explaining you. So basically, your minimax search is an alternative sequence of minimum and maximum plies. Plies means levels. So if you are playing a game, right? If you are playing a game, then in every game, generally, if you are playing a two-person game, then how do you search a best path in that two-person game? So you use minimax search strategy. So it's a sequence of alternative moves where one player is trying to maximize his score, other player is trying to minimize the score of the first player, right? So basically there is an alternative sequence of maximizing and minimizing levels, and that is why we are calling this technique as minimax technique, because both the players are playing in opposite strategy. So it is a recursive procedure. Why it's recursive? Because every time you are there in a tree, you are starting in the root of the tree, then the maximizing node will maximize and generate the next move. That will be the maximum scorer move. Then the next move will be played by the minimizing player. So he will play the move, and that minimax function will be called basically there with a minimizing player. Now, when the minimizing player generates the next move, then again the maximizing player comes. So it's a sequence which is going on and on until you reach this pre-specified level of look ahead. For example, if I say that I want only 14 look aheads, 15 look aheads, then up till 15th level it will go on and on. So the procedure is same. So recursively it will call itself the minimax function, that will call itself again and again. That is why we are calling it as a recursive procedure. So now here, two functions are basically used in Minimax: move generate function and static evaluation function. So this move generate function is basically, it's used by the plausible move generator. And what this plausible move generator does, it is basically generating the set of all possible moves by that particular player in that particular position. So if the player is at a particular position, then what all next moves can be generated. So that will be given by this plausible move generator, or you can say this function move generate. And then the score of that particular position, that will be given by this static evaluation function. So static is a function which is taking two parameters, position and player. So it will return a number which will be nothing be, it will be a score which will represent the goodness of that particular position from the viewpoint of that particular player. Why from the viewpoint of a particular player? Because if a player is a maximizing player, then you have to take the maximum of the scores of the next moves, right? And if it is a minimizing player, then you have to take the minimum of the scores of the next moves. So that is why it depends upon the player that the goodness function would be chosen. So goodness of the position from the viewpoint of the player, right? So these are the two functions which we will use in the algorithm. And then this one we had done yesterday, that when do we stop the recursion. So there are some five conditions which you have to check, and all these five conditions are actually checked by this function deep enough. So deep enough is already checking these, so it evaluates based on all these five factors, and then it will return true if the search has to be stopped at the current level, otherwise it will return a false. So basically deep enough will return true if your the if based on the evaluation of these five factors, if you have to stop, that means you don't want to go further level up, so then deep enough will basically return a true, otherwise it will return a false. So if it returns a false, you can continue going further up in the levels, and if it returns true, then it will just ignore the position parameter, and it will return true when a depth will exceed the cutoff value. So when the depth of your tree exceeds a particular cutoff, it will return a true that you have to stop here and don't go further. So that many plies we will explore. So this is the function which we will use. Now the values returned by minimax is basically it returns your path, whatever is the best path, and it also returns the cost, right? So I had given an example in yesterday's class that if you take this example, here your let us say your best path was through C. So A is the maximizing player and it selects the path through C and it reaches this I. So basically the final score is -2 if you back it up to the root node. So the score through B is -6, the score through C is -2, and the score through D is -4, right? So basically the score through C is basically the best score. So that means your path, which is the best path, is through C. So your path will be basically to reach till up till I. So the path would be ACI and the best score would be -2. So that will be returned by the minimax algorithm. So minimax algorithm returns the best score as well as the best path. Now, what is the recursive call in Minimax doing? It's basically taking three parameters: the current, the board position, the current state basically, and then zero is basically the depth of the search. Initially, when you are at the root node, you don't have a depth, you are not exploring any ply, so the current depth of the search would be zero. But actually, this will be replaced by the actual depth of the tree as and when you go forward in the recursion. So your first parameter is your board position or your current state, then the second parameter is your depth, and the third parameter is a player which is playing. So if you take the initial move, your the minimax will call itself with the initial state, which will be the current state, and depth will be 0, and you are taking the player 1. Suppose player 1 is playing the first chance, so player 1, otherwise if player 2 is playing the first chance, then player 2 will be the third argument. So like this, the recursive call will contain three parameters. Now let's see the algorithm. So algorithm for minimax says that if it takes three parameters: position, depth, and then whatever player is playing the chance. So what it will do is, if deep enough position comma depth, then return the structure, value, and path. So basically, first of all, it is checking that if the number of levels which we have traversed is basically sufficient, we don't want to go further, then it will basically stop. So it will check deep enough condition. If deep enough is returning false, then only it will go forward and it will generate the next moves. Otherwise it will not generate the next moves, so it will stop. So first of all, it has to check if deep enough is returning true or not. If it's returning true, it has to stop, and if it is returning true, it has to stop, and it has to return the value and the path, right? So value would be the current value. That means whatever the value would be determined at the leaf nodes. So basically, if you have stopped at the second level, let us say, so the leaf nodes, that means the moves generated at the second level, they will be having their static evaluation functions applied to them, and that values of the static evaluation function, that will be backed up to the root position, and they will also find out that whatever is the path, so that will be backed up basically. And if you're basically in this case, your value is the value returned by the static evaluation function, and the path is nil. This indicates that there is no path from this node. That means you don't have a further path from this node. Basically you are stopping there, so you don't have any other path which is there from that particular node, which is taking you to your goal state or to a winning position. So that's why you have stopped. So there is no path there. So in that case, deep enough will return true and your path would be nil. So in that case, right? So you have not reached a winning state. Otherwise, if deep enough is returning false, then you can generate the next moves, right? So you will generate one more ply of the tree, and how you will generate? By calling the function move generate. So move generate is always generating the next moves, and then you will set these whatever positions are generated, these will be your successors, right? So these will become your successors. So you will have a list of successors for the current position. So if your position is indicated by this position, so that position will have a list of successors, right? So now, if this successor list is empty, then again there is the same situation that you don't have any path to move forward. So there is no move to be made. So you have to return the same structure that would be returned if your deep enough was true. Deep enough is true means that means you don't have to go any further place. If successor list is empty, then also you cannot go any further. So you will return the same structure of value and path that you will return through if deep enough was true. But if successors is not empty, that then what you will do, you will call minimax. So what you will do, you will examine each element in turn and you will keep track of the best one. So if it is a maximizing node, then you have to take the maximum scorer node as the next node. If it is a minimizing node, then you have to take the minimum scorer as the next best score basically. So how you do that? You initialize a best score. So how you do that? You initialize the best code to a minimum value. So you take it a very minimum value that a static function can return. Basically, the minimum possible value which the static evaluation function can return, that you take initially as to initialize the best score. Then this would be updated actually. It will reflect the best score eventually. So whatever is the best score out of the list of successors, that will be saved in this variable best score, right? So how do you do for each successor? What you do for each element, let us say suck of successors. So for each element, what you do, you try to apply the minimax function. So you call the minimax function with three parameters: the successor itself, and then the depth plus one, and then the opposite player. Why opposite player? Because you are generating the successor of that particular position. So the successor will always be the opposite player, right? So you have to call the minimax function with the opposite player as the parameter, because now player has changed. When you go one level down, player changes. So that is why now it is the opposite player. And depth is basically whatever depth was initially when you were calling this minimax with a depth. Now you are calling the successor with the minimax for the successor. So that means depth would be depth plus one, right? Because the successor would be one level down. So depth plus one would be the depth and player would be opposite player. So this will be and successor is the basically the uh, child of the parent, which is basically your node at a particular position, right? So for that particular successors, your for a particular successor suck, you are basically calling minimax now. Okay, so that minimax would basically carry out this exploration of this successor node. It's a recursive call to minimax. It will actually hello. Students, where was the connection gone? Can anybody tell me what I was teaching at that time? On which point I was? On the fourth point or which one? 4A. Okay. Okay, thank you. So what I was saying was, we were on the fourth A point. So I was explaining that you are basically calculating the score of the successor, right? So what will be the score of the successor? First of all, the successor is at a depth of depth plus one. So if your position, that node's position is depth, then the successor is at depth plus one. And the other thing is, it is the opposite player now, because it's a successor, so it will be opposite player. Because it's mini max, you have opposite sequences, you have alternating sequences of min and max, right? So depth plus one and opposite player, and you're calling that successor with a recursive call to minimax. Now this will carry out actually the exploration of this successor suck, and whatever the value it will return, that will be the score of this successor, right? So it will see whether this value is this new value, whatever you got for this result of this successor, that will actually indicate the merit of the position from the opposite player's perspective, from the next lower level, right? So basically it is reflecting the score of the position from the opposite player's perspective for the next level. Basically nothing but the score of the next move. It's nothing but the score of the next move. That means the successor's move. So now if this new value or the new score which you got is greater than the best score, so you had taken initially the best score as a minimum score, any minimum score. Now if this score which you got from this particular successor is greater than the best score, that best score, that means it's a good score, it's a better score than the best score. So then you have found a successor that is better than whatever you have found so far. So you will set the best score to this new value, right? And the best path would be, so path would be basically your path from the initial node or your current node basically to the successor, and then the path from the success. Basically, successor is your next move, and up till that position you have already generated the path, right? So from up till that position you already have the path plus this successor which you now got it. So that is the best path, right? So the path from that current node, that means your initial node it may be, so from that current node up till that basically your whatever you got up till that particular point, and then attach this successor also. So basically this successor node will also come in the end, and that will become the complete path. Okay, so your complete path would be the recursive up till that recursive call to minimax, that complete path from the initial state, and then plus this successor. So that will become your best path, right? So it's nothing but the same thing which I had explained in the last class. So if you have basically the best path is through C, so what it is returning is the path AC and then this I also. Okay. So basically, if you are taking this, you have three children of A, B, C, and D, right? And basically, this C is your node, that is a particular position, and this I is your successor, right? So this I is a successor, and up till I you have already traversed the path through A and C. Now this I is a successor, and it has got a score of -2, and this score was better. This score was better when you did a recursive call to minimax, so this was a better scorer. So you have basically taken this score, and the path is basically AC and also includes I. So I is your successor plus the already traversed path A and C, and the score will be -2. That's what it is actually saying in this step. Now, finally, you get the best path from one of the successor, and then you can do that for all the successors. And whatever successor has got the best score and the best path, that will be returned finally after step 4, right? So that means all the in step 5, when all the successors have been examined, we know that what is the value of the position and what is the best path. So the value would be the best score and path will be the best path, and that will be returned by this process. So basically it's a recursive call which you are doing, and it will go as many plies as you want. So it will be a recursive call, and it will keep on evaluating, and it will keep on evaluating and putting its results back. It will back the results up to the root node, and it will finally return the best path and the best score depending upon this evaluation, because you are in this fourth C step. In the fourth C step, you are calculating, you are basically comparing with the best score. So if the value is greater than best score, you are basically exchanging that value with the best score. So best score is getting updated each time. So basically it's a comparison which is going on between these successors in order to get the best scorer, right? And the best scorer will actually change depending upon the ply. So the scoring formula will change depending upon the ply because it's written opposite player's perspective. It's written minimax of successor comma depth plus 1 comma opposite player's perspective. So basically it will be from the perspective of the opposite player. So the score would be given based upon that. So every time you make a recursive call, it will carry out the exploration of that successor up till the leaf node, and it will assign a score and back it up till the root node and then find the best scorer and the best path. Same thing, it's written in a form of an algorithm, but it's the same thing which I had explained in the example way in the last class. So then we have some other concept here, adding alpha beta cutoffs to minimax search. So basically, in this minimax search, you have the efficiency of minimax search you can improve actually, because it is not necessary sometimes that you have to generate this complete tree. Okay, so this complete tree which is there is not required sometimes to be generated. Even without generating the complete set of possible paths or complete set of possible states, even without that, you can recognize that what would be your score basically. So you don't need to explore all the states. Some states can be ignored also. So that is basically by using this alpha beta cutoffs. So what is this actually? It's a branch and bound technique in which you can ignore the partial solutions that are clearly worse than a known solution. So, if you already have a better solution with you without exploring that particular portion of the tree, then that particular portion of the tree you can actually abandon earlier. You don't need to explore it and then say that it is bad, right? Suppose you already know that you have a better solution than that particular portion of the tree, so you don't need to explore all the states in that subtree. You can abandon them, you can ignore them, and you can say that it is basically that partial solution in the subtree was clearly worse than whatever we already have, so that is why we have abandoned it early. So it will basically save our time because you will not have to scan through that subtree also, which is a waste of time because it's already worse than what we already have. So this is the whole concept. But actually, we have to modify our search procedure in order to handle this using alpha beta cutoffs. So what we do is we include two bounds for each of the players. So this modified strategy is called as alpha beta pruning in minimax search. So what we are doing is we are using two threshold values over here. One value is called alpha value, other value is called beta value. So alpha value is basically a lower bound on the value that a maximizing node may be assigned, and beta is an upper bound on the value that a minimizing node may be assigned. So basically beta is an upper bound on the minimizing node and alpha is a lower bound on the maximizing node. So this is an important thing to remember, that what is alpha and beta signify. So alpha is signifying a lower bound on the maximizing node, and beta is signifying a upper bound on the minimizing node. Now let us see how it works actually. So you just see the tree over here, students. Just see the tree, the diagram over there in the bottom. So here, after you examine this F, let us say I am applying the minimax search strategy here, and my F is minus, having a score of -5. Okay, so without exploring even this G, I know that this is a minimizing ply at C. So C will select the minimum of F and G, right? So if F is a score of -5, then without exploring G, I know that C would be anything which is less than or equal to -5, right? Because it's a minimizing level. So basically we know that it's a minimizing level, so C will get a score of -5 or less. Without exploring even G, we know that thing, right? But we are also knowing that from this left hand side branch of the tree, if you see here, we are guaranteed a score of 3 or greater at A. So from the right hand side branch of the tree, C is less than or equal to 5, right? And from the left hand side branch of the tree, if you see here, D and E are 3 and 5. So that means it is a minimizing level, so you will select 3, right? So this A, if you back up this result to A, then A will either have 3 or greater than 3 value, because 3 is already there, right? So it's a maximizing level at A. So it will select 3 or something greater than 3, because 3 is already there. So it will not compromise on something less than 3 because it's already having a value of 3. So the score at A would be 3 or greater than 3. So if we move through B, we are guaranteed to get a score of 3 or greater, right? So any other move that is producing a score of less than 3 is worse for us, right? So because we already have a move through B which is getting a score of 3, right? So any other move which is producing a score of less than 3 is worse for us and we can actually ignore it. So if you examine this F, we know that C will be less than or equal to minus 5 regardless of the value of G. So even if we don't explore this G, we know that C would be less than or equal to minus 5. So A actually doesn't bother to explore this G further because it knows that it doesn't have to go through this path through C. That is why we can leave the exploration of this G because we are not bothered about what will be G because eventually this path will not be the path which is chosen because we know that C would be less than or equal to minus 5. So A will not choose the path through C. So we can actually ignore the exploration of this G. Actually, if you see here, the exploration of G is just basically calculating the score of only one node G. So that is not very much score. We are just skipping the calculation of a score of only one node. So this in this case, it may not seem that we are getting a very good advantage if you ignore the exploration of a particular node. But actually, it may be the case that you are exploring a complete, you are basically ignoring a complete subtree. Even that case can occur, right? This is only G, that is only one node, but suppose G had children also, right? Suppose it was a 5-ply search. In this case it is only a 2-ply search, right? But if it is a 5-ply search, let us say, so in that case it will be advantageous to us because you if you explore if you skip the exploration of G, you are actually skipping the exploration of a complete subtree which may have 2 or 3 levels. So you are saving some time because you are actually skipping the exploration of that complete subtree. So that is the basic advantage of using this pruning method. So pruning method will just ignore some portion of the tree, it will not explore all the states and still it will get the same answer. Okay, so here alpha value and beta values are basically the values which are the lower and upper bounds. So alpha value is a lower bound on the maximizing node, and beta value is the upper bound on the minimizing node. So let us see. So this was just to give you a conceptual knowledge about why do we do pruning and how does it actually work. Right, now let us see through what is alpha and beta, how we work using alpha and beta. Up till now it is okay, students? Are you able to get this? Okay, fine. So, so now let us take this working of this use of alpha beta thresholds. How we are using that. So let us take this another example. You're having this tree, okay, and here you are having these leaf nodes. A is generating B and C, and B is generating D E, and from C you have three other children, and so on. So you have basically 5 levels here. One, two, four levels. You have here 4 levels starting from the maximizing node A, then minimizing, then maximizing, and then finally minimizing level. So here, what is basically alpha value? It is the lower bound of the maximizing node, right? So if you see here, node A, if you see the left hand side branch of this node A, it is B and B is generating D and E. So it's basically, if you take D and E, it's a minimizing ply, right? It's a minimizing level. So B will get a value less than 3, 3 or less than 3, right? Because it has to take a value which is minimum of 3 and 5. So it is 3 basically. So basically, B is having a score of 3. So if you back it up to A, so basically your lower bound on the maximizing node is 3. Why? Because through the left hand side branch of the tree, A has got a score of 3. So it will not compromise on anything which is less than 3. Because A is a maximizing node, so it will get a value of 3 or greater than 3. Maybe from the right hand side branch of the tree, it gets a value greater than 3. Right? So from the left hand side branch, it already has a value of 3. So at least 3 will be the score of A, right? So node A will expect a score of at least 3. So that is the lower bound on the maximizing node. So on the maximizing node A, this 3 is a lower bound, because less than 3 it will not accept actually, because it already has the value of 3 at from the left hand side branch of the tree. So that becomes your alpha. Okay, so that becomes your alpha value. Now this alpha value, how does it help to skip the exploration of some particular node? Let us see, let us say it skips, it's basically in this case it's helping us to skip the exploration of this L node. Okay, let's just see the last one, the L node. So L node, we don't need to explore and find the score. Basically, you don't bother about whether its score is 7 or what it is actually. So using this alpha value, how? Let us see through this exploration. So use of alpha, basically, what you are doing through alpha. So after you examine this K, just see here K, after you examine this K has a score of 0, right? So what will be the score of I will have a score of either 0 or less than 0, because it's a minimizing ply. So it does, so basically you see that I is guaranteed to get a maximum score of 0, 0 or less than 0, right? So which means that F is guaranteed to get a, I is having a maximum score of 0, right? And F is a maximizing level. F is a maximizing level. So that means it will get a minimum, what it will get? It will get a minimum score of 0 at least. So it will, F is guaranteed to be a minimum score of 0, right? But actually, if you see here, F is getting a minimum score of 0. So why should you go for exploring the tree through F? I mean, why should you basically, because this is less than the alpha value of 3. Alpha value is 3, which is the lower bound on the maximizing node. So F is also a maximizing node, and it is getting a minimum of 0 through this subtree through I. So the subtree through I is leading to a score of 0 or less than 0. So why should you consider this subtree at all? Because this is not what you need, because already your alpha is 3. So that means you already have a value better than this 0. That means you already have a node which is having a value better than 0, right? So that means you don't need to explore this I through F. So this I subtree is actually not required for you. So basically you can, you don't need to explore other branches of I, because you already have a value which is greater than 0. So you know that this particular value, this particular subtree which is rooted at I, it's not of use to you, because you know that it's a minimizing ply. So it either it will be 0 or less than 0. So it's not required for you this to explore this I. So that is why you can skip the exploration of any other branches of I. That means you can skip this L or any other branch also. If it had, you could actually ignore that exploration, because just through K you know that it will be having 0 or less than 0, and you already have a better value. So the maximizing player already knows not to choose to move to C and then to I. Okay, so the maximizing player knows that not to choose to move to C and then to I. Why? Because if that move is made, then the resulting score would be no better than 0. And a score of 3 can be achieved by moving to through this B node. So the left hand side of the branch of the tree is already getting a better score. So you don't need to go through this I branch. Okay, so that's why you can ignore the exploration of this L, but that you came to know only through the alpha value, because you already have an alpha value of 3. So when you were at the maximizing level, you use this alpha value in order to ignore the exploration of some particular branch of the tree. Are you able to get this, students? Use of alpha value, then we will do for beta also. So alpha value is basically a lower bound of the maximizing node. So you will require it at the maximizing level only. If you have at a maximizing level, if you compare it with alpha. So at F is the maximizing level. So you are comparing at F with alpha. So alpha, so through this branch of the tree, if you take, then you are getting a score of 0, which is actually less than alpha. So that is why you are skipping or cutting off this. You are pruning this I subtree. Basically, you don't need to further explore the branches of I. So then we see for the use of beta. So after cutting off the further exploration of I, then you examine J. Okay. So if you examine J, J is having a value of 5. 5. So that means at F, which is a maximizing level, there would be the value of 5, because from 0 I is 0 or less than 0 and j is 5. So maximizing level will have a value of 5, right? So since it's a maximum of 5 and 0, so this value will be become the value of beta at c, because beta value is already always at the minimizing level. So it will try to minimize the value of c. So if beta value is 5, so that means hello, can you hear me, students? Can you hear me? Okay, fine. So what I was telling was that if you use this alpha value, you can skip the exploration of this further branches of I, right? Now, how to use the beta value? Just see here, after cutting off the exploration of I, you can examine J, and J is here having a value of 5, right? So if J is having a value of 5, so that means F is a maximizing level. So F will have a value of 5. So if f is having a value of 5, what will be the value of c? You don't know the values of g and h actually. You just know the value of f. So the value at c is a minimizing level, right? So the value at c would be basically anything which is uh, 5 or less than 5, because it's the minimizing level, so it will try to minimize the value, so it will select the minimum score. So without knowing even the values of g and h, from even just from f you can find out that the c will have a value of 5 or less, right? So this will become the upper bound on the minimizing node. So your upper bound, that means your beta value would be 5. Okay, now this beta value is 5. So if you go through the second branch of the tree, that means through g, right? So if you take only this so going through G, when you examine this F, it has a score of 7, right? So when you compare this 7, what you will get for G will get a score of, it's a maximizing level. So it will get a score of 7 or greater than 7, right? But this value at G, that means 7, it's already, which is greater than beta. It's already greater than beta. So that means you don't need to explore this G further, because it's already greater than beta. So you already have a better node. You already have F, which is having a value of 5. So your beta is 5. So so for the minimizing level, you have this beta value which you use to compare. So you are comparing it with the value at g, and it is not basically satisfying. G is already having a greater value, so you don't need to explore the further branches of g. So you don't need to explore this n or any other further branch of g. Okay, so basically when you compare the 7 with beta, it is greater, and the player whose turn it is at c, so it's trying to minimize. So this player will not choose g, which will have at least a 7 score, because the move through f is already having a score of 5. So we can ignore the exploration of other branches of g. Similarly, uh, so basically this is the concept here, where actually leaving out the exploration of the branches of g. Through m we had just done, but n we are not exploring. So this was the use of beta. Just because the value of g was greater than beta, so we cut off the exploration of the further branches of g. And for alpha, just because the value of alpha was basically, the value of this f was less than this alpha value of 3, so that is why we did not explore the further branches of I. Okay, so that is why we have ignored. So basically this L can be pruned away. We don't need to explore it using the alpha value. And this child of G, that means N, it can also be pruned away using the beta value. So this is the use of alpha and beta values. So if you, these are just the some thresholds which you choose, and using these thresholds you can cut away some part of the tree which you know that you don't need to explore because it's already clearly worse than what better solutions you already have. Are you able to get this concept, students? What is the meaning of pruning the tree using these thresholds? Getting or not? All of you, please respond, all of you. Okay, what about others? Ranshu, Mohit, Nitin, Deval, what about others? Are you getting all of you? Is it fine? I don't think these are very difficult concepts. These are easy concepts only, but still. Okay, fine. So this was basically some introduction to game playing and how do we do using Minimax search strategy. If I find an example of using alpha beta thresholds, any other example, then I will discuss in tomorrow's class. And now we will start with another topic, that is expert systems. Okay, just 1 minute. I'll open that PPT. So this is one other topic, expert systems and application students. It's a theoretical topic, not this is basically there are no kind of numericals in this one. It's a theoretical topic. But actually, what is an expert system? We need to know that thing because it's very new and it's very interesting and it's actually of very important from the viewpoint of your AI course and machine learning course, because actually expert systems are everywhere now, right? So let us study this topic. This also comes under advanced AI only. So this expert systems, basically we they will be dealing with some topics like how to represent and use the domain knowledge. So up till now we had done some knowledge representation techniques. If you remember, students, we had done some knowledge representation techniques, and we had also done that how many kinds of knowledge are there. Like you have inferential knowledge, you have inheritable knowledge, you have procedural knowledge, and you have declarative knowledge, right? And then you have different ways of representing the knowledge also. For example, we had done weak slot and filler structures, and we had done strong slot and filler structures. So those are different kinds of knowledge representation techniques only, right? So how do you represent the domain knowledge in an expert system? So that is one thing. Other thing is, what are the features of an expert system and how do you acquire the knowledge in an expert system? So acquisition of knowledge is very important in an expert system, because the way you are acquiring the knowledge in an expert system, that is actually the mean, that is actually basically helping you to make decisions and intelligent decisions basically. So those decisions would be intelligent decisions depending upon the kind of knowledge you have, how you are acquiring it, how you are processing it, how you are inferencing based on that. Okay, so that we will study. And then what is an expert system shell? So this is the most important concept of this topic, expert system shell. And then some applications of expert systems. So, what is an expert system? It's basically an intelligent system which is nothing but a group of instructions that can output a result using some knowledge. So, most important thing is the knowledge base in an expert system. And the other thing is how you are inferencing using that knowledge base. Okay, so you have some human experts which are actually giving the knowledge to you, so that forms the domain knowledge, right? So some experts are already there which are giving the knowledge to you, so those actually form that forms the knowledge base. And now you are inferencing using that knowledge base. So some technique you have to apply here. So a human expert would basically give you some knowledge or the domain knowledge here, and then you will basically use an inference engine. The expert system uses an inference engine. This is the main control program, basically your control program, your program which is basically tackling with the data or the domain knowledge which the expert is giving. Now it is basically analyzes. What it does is basically analyzes that domain knowledge which it has been given in order to devise some patterns. So some patterns like or some rules, basically like if some data is fed to this expert system, so it will infer something from that. It will analyze the data and then it will make some predictions. So there will be a user interface through which it will be interacting with the real world, through the users, through the humans. And through that user interface, it will be basically answering your queries or questions or making some decisions. For example, if you have an app for, let us say you have an app for classification of an image. Let us say you want one of a very good application these days, which is a very recent application, is like diseases prediction in the crops. So if you are predicting some disease is happening in the crop or not, or which kind of disease it is, so what you will do is you will have a user interface where the farmer or any other person will upload the image of the crop. And if it is a diseased crop, so basically you will, at your backend you will have a database which will be a database of large database of diseased crops, and that is already available to you from the domain knowledge. So you have different images of diseased crops, and that forms your data set at the back end, and you are basically able to analyze that data set of diseased crops and predict some patterns out of it. So you are basically able to make some rules out of it, that if that image is like this, then that means it's a disease. Suppose you find some common patterns in the diseased crops, in the images of the diseased crops. So you can basically write those patterns in the forms of rules. And when a new image comes, you can basically use those same rules to predict that whether the new image is representing a diseased crop or not, right? So basically it's the inference engine is basically your program which you are writing to make some analysis of the data. So basically it is certain kind of rules for decision making which are there in the inference engine to infer something, basically. So this inference engine is your main component, and this knowledge base is basically your domain knowledge given by the experts. When the AI experts works on that, so the AI expert basically uses that knowledge base which is given by the human expert. The AI expert will use that knowledge base and it will try to build some patterns or out of it, use in the inference engine basically. And that will form your prediction algorithm. Now this prediction algorithm can be used on any new data also. And it will interact through the real world by taking more data, and it will have a user interface for that. So this is the main concept of an expert system. I'll take more examples, then you will understand that what is an expert system actually. So expert system, students, everything what we are doing these days in machine learning and in optimization of things, like if you have heard of optimization algorithms. So all these optimization algorithms which are trying to minimize the score or maximize the score or minimize the cost or uh, maximize the output. So all these are basically working on the principle of these expert systems only. So all these are expert systems only. They have their own inference engine. That inference engine is basically your control program, which is making some analysis of the data and making it in the form of some decision making algorithm. So that decision making algorithm or your main working main mechanism which you are using to predict some new events, that is your that is done through an expert system inference engine. So you'll understand it more when we will discuss it further in details. So first of all, first thing is knowledge base creation, right? So we have to create a knowledge base. So for that, we have some representation schemes. So whatever knowledge is fed by the human expert, you have to represent that knowledge properly. So we have studied already that how do we represent the knowledge. We have already studied in your previous classes. We have done this, that how do we represent the knowledge. So we represent the knowledge using some weak slot and filler structures, and also we have strong slot and filler structures. So different kinds of knowledge we represent through different structures. For example, if you want to represent inheritable knowledge, you will use semantic network, right? For frames also, you will use for inheritable knowledge, you will use frames also. right? Then some other kind of knowledge if you want to represent, then you will use some other kind of networks. For example, decision trees are best used for inferential knowledge representation, because decision trees are basically in the form of some if then rules. So decision trees are basically representing your rules. So decision tree is a concept. You will also study this when you will go further and you some advanced courses like machine learning. In that you will understand these concepts. But actually, what is a decision tree? It's basically a tree which we create, which has certain if then rules coded in it. And using those if then rules, you can predict that if this is the sequence of action events, then this will be the action, basically. So decision tree has certain rules encoded in it. So it's a kind of an inferential knowledge representation, because using some given if conditions, you can predict that what will be the output. So it depends upon what are the existing if then rules, and using those existing if then rules, you are able to predict the patterns. And then when a new condition comes, you are able to predict that what will be the action. So for inferential knowledge representation, you will use decision trees. Then neural networks are also there. Neural networks is also a way of representation. In the case of a neural network is also one technique, basically. So in this neural network, whenever you represent the knowledge in a neural network, that knowledge can actually refine itself, and it can basically improve iteratively. So that knowledge can actually refine itself. Okay, so if you are having an initial database of knowledge in a neural network, you can refine that knowledge up to the level of a very good accuracy, basically. So that initially, if you are not getting very good results from the existing knowledge, the knowledge can actually improve itself, and you will be able to get better results with each iteration of a neural network. So that is the main fundamental of neural network, that it can learn iteratively. Okay, so these are different representations for knowledge. So we have two types, basically, frame based and rule based representation. So frame based is basically, we also call it as a non production system architecture. So non production system means you don't have production rules there, right? You don't represent anything in the car in the form of rules. So decision trees is an exception to that, because decision trees are also having if then rules. Okay, but generally we use frames and semantic networks. So these are non production rules based, so we call them as non production system architecture. And they're used for developing complex and strong expert systems, because you can represent any kind of knowledge, even complicated objects you can represent. If you remember, we had done how to represent different sentences in a semantic network, and we had done long sentences also. We could represent even the sentences which had quantifiers associated with them through a partitioned semantic network, right? So you can represent any kind of complicated objects and sentences in a semantic network or in a frame representation. So these are the different representations in a frame-based or a non-production system architecture. And rule-based is simple. You have rules and facts, right? So it's the most common way of representing the knowledge. Generally, whenever someone gives you some information, what you try to do is you represent it in the form of rules. You try to represent it in the form of rules, so that you are creating a database of rules, so that whenever a new information comes, or a new event comes, you can predict the action based on that event. Basically, if you have if then else statements, it is a very simple way. It will have an if part and a then part, right? So if part will consist of some conditions, or you can say premises, then part would be some conclusion or actions. So if you have a new condition, you can actually use the existing set of conditions to predict to which will be certain rules. Using those conditions, you can say that this would be the action associated with it. So for a new rule, sorry, for a new condition, you can predict the action easily if you have a set of if then rules. So generally, Prolog is a language which is having a rule based architecture. Prolog is having a rule based architecture where we use certain if then rules only, but we don't write in the form of if and then statements. But we have certain symbols in that language, and in that language Prolog, you can easily represent rules, facts and rules. Facts are basically declarative sentences, right? And rules are basically some if then else statements. So both of these can be represented in Prolog, and it can be used to even answer the queries based on the existing set of rules and facts. It can answer the queries also. But actually, Prolog is a language which is not that much used these days. It's becoming obsolete also. So that is why we have stopped studying that as a part of the AI course. So earlier we used to study this language Prolog as a part of the AI course, but this time and even the last time we have not taught this Prolog as a part of AI course because it's already a very kind of an obsolete language. We are not using this language anymore for coding purposes. We are generally working on, if you talk about the latest trends in AI and machine learning, you are generally working with Python, right? So that is why we have introduced a course on Python. Python, we have programming in Python that will be there in the next curriculum, but Prolog we have removed. Okay, so these are different knowledge representation schemes. We have two knowledge representation schemes. So using these, you will represent the knowledge base in an expert system. Now, the second thing is this inference engine, right? So what is this inference engine actually doing? So you have a concept which we call as an expert system shell, right? So what is an expert system shell? And then I will relate this to this inference engine. Fine. So what is an expert system shell? An expert system shell is basically an independent object, right? So whatever knowledge you are acquiring, that knowledge is basically kept somewhere else, right? And there is a control program which is an independent program, and this knowledge is separated from this control program. Okay, so whatever knowledge you are gathering, whatever domain knowledge you are gathering, so you can make any modification to the knowledge base, but you won't need to change your program in order to basically use that knowledge base. Okay, so that control program is nothing but your expert system shell. So what is an expert system shell? It can be basically a shell is nothing but kind of an empty bucket, and you can fill it with different knowledge bases. So it does not depend upon the knowledge base. Your inference mechanism or your algorithm does not depend upon your knowledge base. So even if you change your database of knowledge, the same algorithm or the same inference procedure can even work on the new knowledge base also. So the inferencing technique is has to be a generic technique which can be which can be basically working for different knowledge bases. So that inferencing technique, which is a general technique, which we basically symbolize it or we call it as an expert system shell. Okay, why an expert system shell? Because shell, as you know, the name of a literal meaning of a shell, it's basically customizable. You have a general thing and you can customize it. You can put any kind of things in it basically, right? Any kind of bullet basically in it, in if you talk in the term of a literal meaning of a shell. So it's kind of an empty bucket where you can fill different knowledge bases, but still you won't need to change your program. So whatever program you have written, whatever algorithm you have coded, you don't need to change it for different knowledge bases. For example, I can also give you an example. If you have, suppose, a sorting algorithm, right? So suppose you have a sorting algorithm, and that sorting algorithm is basically sorting, right? Its purpose is to sort. So it should not depend upon what kind of input you are giving for sorting, right? For example, if you are giving an integer numbers to sort, or if you are giving floating point numbers to sort, okay, so if you are giving some characters to sort, it should be basically customizable. It should be basically, that should not depend upon the kind of data set, because if you change the data set, you should not change your sorting algorithm. You should not change it. So it, or otherwise, if you write a sorting algorithm and that algorithm can work on any kind of array or any different entries in an array, so that is a, that algorithm is your algorithm. Basically it will be, you can say it is analogous to an expert system shell, and it can work with different knowledge bases because you can work it over different set of list of items. So for example, you have a sorting loop running on a list of items, so that items can change but that sorting algorithm will not change. Okay, so then it will be a, it can be, expert system can be, shell can be imagined like this. So expert system shell remains constant irrespective of the kind of rules it executes. So it does not depend upon the kind of rules it is executing, because whatever generic rules you have framed, that will not change, but the data set will change. So depending upon the data set, those rules will be working on the same data set and predicting the outputs accurately. So the expert system shell won't change. So it's a customizable, not customizable. You can say that it is basically a constant thing. It is not changing basically. So I'll give you more examples about what is an expert system shell and recently how do we use it. So what are the recent latest trends going on, and what are the different applications latest which are going on, and how do we use this expert system shell, that we will also discuss in tomorrow's class. Okay. So anybody can take the attendance if Divya, I think Divya is not here. Anybody can, Nitin, can you take the attendance? Okay. Please take the attendance, Nitin, and mail me. Have you done? Done? Okay, thank you, Nitin. So we'll meet tomorrow 11 o'clock. I'll continue with the expert system topic. Okay, thank you, all of you.